Hey, this is Hans from Dakota Angler and Outfitter. Today we're going to tie a foam-backed humpy. Humpies are an attractor pattern that work quite well if you remember to use them. And this one has worked quite well for me on the small streams I fish. I've got some 70 denier ultra thread, standard wire dry fly hook, and I'm going to wrap back about halfway on the hook shank, then spiral forward about the 2/3 point, meaning I'm 2/3 of the way from the back of the hook towards the front of the hook. And first things first, and probably the hardest part of this fly, is I'm going to take a stacked clump of deer hair. It's important to use the right hair. You want a short, fine-tipped hair. And we like the hair offerings from Nature's Spirit. They offer a type of hair for just about every type of application. I'm going to match the length of my wing to the length of my hook shank. So just kind of measure that up by laying your clump of hair, and it's been stacked in a hair stacker. If you don't know how to use a hair stacker, we have a video on our techniques section that shows you how to do that. So I get that measured out. I'll tie in the hair at that 2/3 point with some loose wraps of hair or thread over the hair. The hair will flare a little bit. It's okay. Once we've got those loose wraps in, we're going to trim out the butts at a bit of an angle. We'll take our tips, put a little more pressure on that thread to make sure they're nice and securely tied to the hook shank. Wrap in front a couple times. We'll clean this mess up a little bit here. We'll wrap in the back as well and just cover up as many of those short fibers as we can. Whatever's left over, we can always work around with some more thread and a few snips with our scissors. Okay. Looks a little rough right now, but we'll get there. So now, just keep working that hair so it wants to stand up. Throw a few more thread wraps in front. Trim out any other little hairs that have gotten away from us. And now we've got our our wing started. The next thing we have to do, and it helps sometimes to turn your vise towards you to do this, is take and divide that wing into 2 equal clumps. Like so. Try to get them even, or else the finished fly will look a little funny if this wing doesn't turn out. Okay, so then you're going to take your thread and just wrap around each one of these as if it was a parachute post. You don't need tons of tension here. You don't want to flare this hair way too much. Go back down to the hook shank. And then switch and do the other side. Just wrapping around, almost like you made 2 different parachute posts. Then switch back to the hook shank. You can do a couple figure eights in between just to make sure you got them nice and separated. And there you should have 2 wings. Now, we'll go to the back of the hook. We'll work on our tail. So we got another small clump of hair, deer hair, or you could use elk hair as well, that I've stacked in a hair stacker. And again, we want our tail to be about the length of the hook shank. So we'll do the same measurement just in reverse here. And then switch switch hands. Now I've got a lot of extra hair there. What I'm going to do is trim that out so that my tie-in amount kind of ends up meeting up with the butts from where my wing was tied in. So that way I can have a uniform underbody. So where I'm going to tie in is right here. My thread is going to wrap right along there, but I want the butts to match up with where these were trimmed off. So trim that back just a tiny bit more. Lay that up on the hook shank. I want this to be on top. And I'm just going to do some loose bundling wraps to get everybody in place without tons of thread tension. Just enough to get everybody in place. So now I got a tail, 2 wings. I can move up here, clean this area up just a little bit, and just cover the whole thing again with some thread wraps. Again, you're not using loads and loads of tension here. Just loose tension for now. Okay, so now we got our wings, our tail. Now this is a foam back humpy where you're substituting the normal deer hair that you would pull over the back with a piece of foam, which lasts a little longer when fish's teeth rake against it. So we're going to set a piece of tan foam that's cut to a little more than 1/8 of an inch wide, right up just behind the wings. We're going to tie that right on the top of the hook shank, and then wrap back to the back of the hook. Wind over that, covering it up as much as we can. Don't have to get too carried away. And now, instead of floss on this fly, give it a little iridescence. I'm going to use some midge diamond braid for my body underneath my hump. So I'll tie that in, wrap over it to the back, the tie-in point, so that I'm wrapping all the way back here, covering that up until I'm at this tie-in point. And then I will wrap back forward, just shy of the base of the wings. And then I can wrap my midge diamond braid for my body, just making sure I'm wrapping back enough that I'm covering up all my thread wraps so that I don't have that showing through. And then when I get up to where my thread is waiting, we'll tie that off with 2 or 3 wraps. And then we'll trim off the excess. Now we can make our hump. We'll pull our foam over the back of the fly, tie it down, and then trim off the excess. Trying not to trim off our wings at the same time. We'll be left with a little stub there, and what you can do is just wrap a few more wraps of thread to cover that up a little bit. And now, last but not least, some brown saddle hackle. I'll tie that in with the light side facing us. That means when we wrap it, the cup will be facing forward. Tie that stem in and then bring your thread in front of the wings. Wrap over the stem a little bit more if there's still some there. And then we'll do our hackle. Can be fairly liberal with the hackle here. There's supposed to be a fair amount of hackle on a traditional style humpy like this. Well, I guess this is a little bit non-traditional with the foam and whatnot, but this style of fly, you want it to ride nice and high. It'll support a dropper really well that way. So put on quite a bit of hackle. Okay, Now that we're up by the eye, we can tie off our hackle with a few wraps of thread. Trim off any excess. There's always a few little hackle barbs that get in the way. You can always push those out of the way and make room for your whip finish there. And give it the limited space, I'm just going to finish this, instead of with a whip finish, with a series of half hitches. And then I can coat it with a little bit of head cement just to be sure that everybody's going to stay together. Trim off my thread. Get rid of that little hackle barb that's in the way. Now I'll take my bodkin and some head cement. And just sneak a little head cement on that thread head. Let it soak back into the hackle a little bit. And there we have a classic dry fly with a few updates. I've had humpies come through in some situations where you think these fish won't eat anything. You're throwing all sorts of tiny technical dry flies at them, and then you throw a humpy at them, and for whatever reason they eat it. It's a great pocket water dry fly that you can hang a little nymph behind and have it be a good strike indicator for you. So don't give up on flies just because they're classics. You know, they still work. They still have a place in your vise and in your box. So tie some up, substitute foam for the hump on the back, and you'll get a few more fish out of them because they won't be able to bite through that foam. And enjoy fishing humpies this summer. Thanks for watching. I'm Hans. We've got lots of other videos on our website, flyfishsd.com.